My sister's perfect daughters shredded my daughter's prom dress to pieces 3 days before the dance. They thought they ruined her night, but they didn't realize they just handed me the match to burn their golden lives down. I'm 41, and if you asked anyone who knows me, they'd tell you I'm the kind of dad who shows up. I don't mean just being a warm body in the bleachers at a school play. I mean, I am there. Mentally, emotionally, and with every ounce of focus I possess. Maybe it's a trauma response, or maybe it's just because my own childhood felt like a perpetual audition for a role I was never going to get. Growing up, my parents treated life like a performance review, and I was the employee perpetually stuck on improvement needed. My younger sister, Melissa, was the golden child, the little ray of sunshine, who could do no wrong. Me? I was the kid with the loose screws, the one who couldn't quite find his footing while everyone else was sprinting. I realized early on that my parents' praise was a currency I'd never have enough of to buy their respect. So I stopped bankrolling my self-worth on their opinions. I built a life that was mine. No strings, no inherited guilt, just me. For the last 5 years, it's been just me and my daughter, Ivy. Her mom, Amanda, checked out when Ivy was 10. It wasn't a blow-up, it was a slow erosion. Amanda was restless, craving a more that I couldn't provide. She moved across the country to get settled, promising to send for Ivy. That was half a decade ago. Now, Amanda is just a series of glitchy FaceTime calls and the occasional postcard from whatever city she's currently trying to find herself in. Ivy stopped waiting by the window a long time ago. I made a silent vow back then. Ivy would never ever feel like she was second best. Not to a career, not to a new partner, and certainly not to her mother's whims. Ivy is 16 now, and honestly, she's incredible. She's this fierce, gentle soul who plays the violin like she's sharing a secret with the universe. She's shy, not quiet, if that makes sense. The kind of girl who observes everything, filing it away with a dry, wicked sense of humor that catches people off guard. She's never been part of the main character crowd, the girls who live for TikTok trends and Starbucks runs. So when she told me she was nominated for prom court, I saw this flash in her eyes, a mix of terror and genuine, heart-aching surprise. It was like she finally realized the world was seeing the light I'd been seeing since the day she was born. I'll admit it, I got choked up. I know, it's just prom. But for a girl who spent years as the underdog, this was her moment in the sun. The dress we found was a soft slate blue. It wasn't just a garment, it was armor. It made her eyes look like storm clouds right before a summer rain. I remember the exact moment she saw it in the shop window. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring at it like it had whispered her name. When she finally tried it on and stepped out of the changing room, the silence in the shop was heavy. She looked at herself in the mirror, her fingers hovering over the fabric as if she didn't quite believe she was allowed to touch something so beautiful. "Is it too much?" she whispered, her voice small and unsure. "Ivy," I told her, clearing the lump in my throat. "It's exactly enough." I didn't care about the price tag. That look of burgeoning confidence? You don't put a price on that. But then, there's my family. Melissa and I have a relationship that I'd describe as load-bearing civility. We talk just enough to keep the peace. She has twin daughters, Bella and Lily, who are 17 and basically carbon copies of Melissa. Sharp, ambitious, and obsessed with the social hierarchy. They aren't mean girls in the cinematic sense, but their kindness has teeth. They deal in compliments that feel more like social strikes. "Oh my God, Ivy, you're so brave for wearing your hair like that," or "I love how you just don't care what people think." Ivy usually absorbs it with a stoic grace that makes me proud and breaks my heart at the same time. She never complains after family dinners, but I can see the way she retreats into herself after an afternoon spent with her cousins. She spent her life being the other grandchild, the one who didn't quite fit the polished, curated image Melissa's family projects. But with this prom nomination and that slate blue dress, I really thought, for once, the playing field might actually be level. I thought she finally had something that was hers, something they couldn't diminish with a backhanded compliment or a condescending smirk. I should have known better. In my family, the golden child energy doesn't just skip a generation, it intensifies. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that feels like it's vibrating with all the things left unsaid. For years, I'd watched Ivy retreat like that. She'd just get quiet, folding into herself like a piece of origami, and spend hours on the couch with her sketch pad. I'd convinced myself that if she wasn't complaining, she was fine. I was an idiot. I was projecting my own don't rock the boat survival tactics onto a 16-year-old who deserved a protector, not a peacekeeper. That was my first mistake. My second was saying yes when Melissa texted me 2 weeks before prom. Hey, can the twins crash at your place for the weekend? Mark and I are doing a wine tasting upstate. It'll be so good for the girls to bond. And every instinct I had screamed no. But that pathetic, well-trained voice in the back of my head, the one that still wanted my sister to like me, the one that feared the difficult label, told me to play nice. I figured we could shift our plans. I thought, maybe they've matured. They hadn't. They rolled in Friday evening, dragging wheeled duffel bags like they were influencers checking into a 5-star resort, smelling of expensive lip gloss and entitlement. Bella didn't even say hello. She just gave Ivy a clinical once-over. Cute socks, she said. In the dialect of teenage girls, that is a tactical strike. It doesn't mean the socks are cute. It means, I have noticed you are wearing something budget-friendly and quirky because you don't know how to be cool, like us. Can we see the dress? Lily asked, already hovering near Ivy's bedroom. Ivy hesitated, her posture stiffening. It's not really ready yet, she mumbled. But Bella was already a shark in the water. She was in the room, her hand darting toward the garment bag hanging on the back of the door before Ivy could even process the intrusion. She zipped it down just enough to peek. This? Bella asked, pulling a sliver of the slate blue fabric into the light. It's nice. Kind of plain, though, very understated. Ivy stood frozen, her lips pressed into a thin white line. I like it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Of course you do, sweetie, Lily chirped, that compliment with teeth shining through. I went to bed early that night, exhausted from a week of overtime and the mental drain of hosting Melissa's little rays of sunshine. I trusted them to be civil. I thought because they were family, there was a baseline of decency. I was wrong. I was about to learn that Melissa's daughters didn't just cast shadows. They lived in them. Saturday morning was a facade of normalcy. I made chocolate chip pancakes, Ivy's absolute favorite, but she just picked at them, moving the crumbs around her plate like a puzzle she couldn't solve. Bella and Lily spent the morning talking at her, a relentless stream of consciousness about after-parties, whether Ryan or Chase looked better in a slim-fit tux, and the politics of the prom court. Ivy would offer a small, performative smile every now and then, but it never reached her eyes. I chalked it up to pre-prom jitters. I figured once the twins went to the mall or got lost in their phones, Ivy and I could actually talk. Except they never left. They hovered. They rotated between the living room and Ivy's bedroom, their low, rhythmic murmurs cutting off the second I walked down the hall. At one point, I caught Bella closing Ivy's door with a frantic snap, her eyes wide and guilty, like she'd just been caught lifting a necklace from a department store. Everything okay in there? I asked, my internal alarm bells finally starting to ring. Yeah, Bella chirped, her smile appearing too fast to be real. Just helping her pick out earrings. Girl talk, Uncle Kyle. I let it go. I didn't want to be the paranoid dad. I didn't want to ruin the bonding. By the time Melissa arrived Sunday evening to pick them up, she was a whirlwind of frantic energy and faux importance. She floated through my front door with that royalty in exile vibe she's perfected. Thanks again for watching them, she said, her eyes never leaving her phone screen. I am so behind. Planning the professional photos, coordinating with the other committee moms. It's a full-time job, honestly. They're 17, Mel, I said, my voice tight. I'm sure they can pick out their own flowers without a subcommittee meeting. Melissa laughed, the kind of dismissive tinkling sound that implied I was just being classic grumpy Kyle. Then she turned her gaze toward Ivy. You're going with that little group from the orchestra, right? The girl with the purple hair? What's her name? Joyce? Jocelyn, Ivy corrected quietly. Right, so sweet of them to invite you along, Melissa said. The suite dripped with condescension, the implication being that Ivy was a charity case for the weird kids. I saw Ivy's eyes flick to mine. There was a tremble there, a tiny fracture in her composure that she was desperately trying to hide. I should have pressed her right then. I should have walked Melissa and the twins to the curb and demanded to know what was happening. But I didn't. Sunday night was a tomb. Ivy stayed in her room. When I knocked to ask about hair appointments or if she needed a ride to get her corsage, her voice came through the wood, flat and hollow. I have a headache, Dad, I'm fine. She wasn't fine. The shadow had already arrived, and I was still standing in the dark. That should have been my lighthouse, the warning flare I ignored. Ivy doesn't do dismissive. She's introverted, sure, but she's never cold, especially not with me. We've been a team of two for too long for walls to go up without a reason. By Wednesday, I had successfully gaslit myself into thinking it was just pre-prom nerves. She'd finally touched base with Jocelyn about the limo, and she even showed me her shoes. Delicate, silver strappy things that looked like they'd be instruments of torture by midnight. But she was smiling. The light was flickering back on, and I clung to that. I told myself everything was Gucci. I told myself my daughter was just growing up. Then came Friday, the day before the big dance, the day the floor fell out from under us. I walked through the front door around 6 p.m., balancing 2 bags of Thai takeout and a venti peace of mind. I figured she'd be too jittery for a real dinner, so pad thai was the tactical choice. Ivy, I got the goods, I called out. Silence. Not the I'm wearing headphones silence, but the heavy, suffocating kind that makes the hair on your arms stand up. Her bedroom light was spilling into the hallway, a jagged yellow rectangle on the floor. I kicked off my shoes and moved toward her door, and that's when I heard it. A sound so small and broken it barely qualified as noise. A hitch and a breath, caught halfway between a sob and a gasp for air. I pushed the door open softly. My heart didn't just drop, it shattered. Ivy was sitting on the floor in the middle of her room, her open closet gaping behind her like a wound. The slate blue dress, the dress that was supposed to be her armor, lay across her lap in literal pieces. This wasn't a snag. Wait until you hear what happens next. But before we get to the most insane part of the story, make sure to subscribe to Reddit Echo and hit the bell icon. You don't want to miss the updates on this one. Let's get back to it. This wasn't a zipper mishap. The satin bodice had been torn jaggedly at the seams, the threads screaming where they'd been forced apart. One delicate strap was dangling by a single, pathetic thread. And the skirt? That waterfall of pale blue fabric had been systematically slashed right down the center. It was mutilated. It was violent. Ivy was clutching one of the detached sleeves, her fingers trembling so hard they were blurring. She looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't have a solution. Ivy, I said, my voice barely a thread. What happened? She looked up at me and my soul just bruised. Her eyes were bloodshot, glassy with a level of hurt I hadn't seen since her mother left. I don't know, she whispered. It was a lie, but not the kind meant to deceive. It was the kind meant to protect me from the truth she already knew. I found it like this, when I got home from school. I crouched down beside her, the smell of Thai food from the kitchen mocking the misery in the room. Did someone come in here, Ivy? Tell me. She didn't answer. Her jaw clenched and I saw her knuckles go white. The zipper was caught last week, she finally choked out. I took it to Nana's to see if she could fix it. She's so good at sewing. Nana, my mother. Suddenly, the bonding weekend with Melissa's twins started to take on a sinister new shape in my mind. She said she'd drop it back off with Bella and Lily when they came over last Friday, Ivy said, her voice hollow, like she was reading an autopsy report. I didn't want to be a burden, Dad. I didn't want to seem ungrateful if they were doing me a favor. I stared at the shredded remains of my daughter's confidence. The weight of it settled in my chest like cold concrete. Did Nana say anything else to you? Ivy's voice cracked. a sound that will haunt me until the day I die. She told me not to get too confident about the prom court. She said the twins would probably win anyway, so it didn't really matter what I wore. That was it, the snapping point. Something primal and ancient stirred in my gut. It wasn't the hot, screaming rage of my youth. It was something worse. It was a cold, simmering, absolute fury. My daughter, my gentle, brilliant, resilient daughter, had been hunted. Her joy hadn't just been stolen. It had been harvested and discarded like trash. And those girls? My sister's little rays of sunshine? They weren't toddlers making mistakes. They were 17. They were old enough to calculate. They were old enough to be cruel. "Get your shoes on," I said. My voice was dangerously calm. Ivy blinked, a tear finally escaping and trekking down her cheek. "What?" "We're going to Nana's. Right now." "Dad, no. Please, I don't want to make a scene. It'll just make school worse." I reached out and took her hand, meeting her eyes with the steadiness I didn't know I possessed. "Ivy, listen to me. You didn't ask for this. You didn't do anything to deserve this. You aren't the one making a scene, kiddo. You're just the one who's going to be there when the curtain goes up." She hesitated, then nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. When we pulled into my parents' driveway, the sun was dying behind the trees, casting long skeletal shadows across the lawn. Melissa's SUV was already there. Of course it was. The universe has a sick sense of irony. Ivy stayed glued to my side as we walked up the porch steps. My heart was thudding against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I rang the bell. My mother opened the door, a look of genuine surprise crossing her face. "Kyle? Ivy? What a surprise. We were just sitting down. We need to talk," I interrupted. The polite sun mask was gone. Her smile faltered, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Of course. Come in, dear." The moment we crossed the threshold, the sound of high-pitched laughter drifted in from the kitchen. Bella and Lily, my hands curled into fists at my sides. I led Ivy into the living room, turned to my mother, and didn't waste a second. "Where's the dress, Mom?" She blinked, playing the part of the confused matriarch perfectly. "Excuse me? What on earth are you talking about?" "Ivy's prom dress," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "The one you fixed. The one you gave to the twins to bring over to our house. Where is the rest of it?" She paused, her eyes darting toward the kitchen, and for the first time in my life, I saw the golden child's protector look visibly uncomfortable. The shadow was finally moving. "Melissa promised me she'd make sure they were careful," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that made the air in the room feel thin. "She never received it in one piece, Mom. It was torn to shreds, deliberately, with intent." My mother's face went ash white, her hand flying to her throat as if to catch her breath. I'm sure it was an accident, Kyle. Girls that age, they're clumsy, It wasn't an accident." The floorboards creaked behind us. I didn't even have to turn around to know the twins were there. They hovered in the arched doorway of the living room, caught in the act of being found out. Bella's face was a mask of cold indifference, her chin tilted up like she was waiting for a boring lecture to end. Lily, at least, had the decency to look a little rattled, her eyes darting between me and the floor. Neither of them said a word. "You girls want to explain?" I asked, pivoting to face them. "Because right now I'm looking at a heap of ruined fabric that cost more than your last 3 pairs of sneakers combined, and a daughter who hasn't stopped shaking since she got home." Bella shrugged, a casual, dismissive movement that made my blood boil. "It was just a joke, Uncle Kyle. God, relax." Ivy inhaled sharply beside me, a jagged, painful sound. Lily chimed in, her voice pitched in that fake sweet tone she learned from her mother. "We didn't think she'd freak out. It's just a dress." "She shouldn't be the prettiest one there anyway," Bella muttered under her breath, just loud enough for the room to hear. "It's not fair." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. My mother opened her mouth to provide some sort of golden child damage control, but no words came out. Then Melissa finally strolled in from the back patio, glass of wine in hand, freezing mid-step when she saw the standoff. What's going on? Why does everyone look like they're at a funeral? I turned to her slowly. Your daughters destroyed Ivy's prom dress, Melissa. They shredded it. Melissa didn't gasp. She didn't scold them. She laughed. A short, sharp, incredulous sound. Oh, come on, Kyle. Really? They're teenagers. It's just some drama over a piece of fabric. Don't be so sensitive. Try telling that to her face, I said, gesturing to Ivy. Try telling your niece that the one thing that made her feel confident, the one thing she finally felt she deserved, was just drama. Melissa rolled her eyes, leaning against the doorframe. Maybe if she had thicker skin, things like this wouldn't be such a tragedy. That was when Ivy did something she never does. She stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a blade. Why do you hate me so much? The room went dead silent. My mother looked at the carpet. Melissa crossed her arms, the smugness momentarily flickering. And the twins? They just smirked. No apology, no remorse, just the ugly, naked satisfaction of having successfully put the underdog back in her place. I took Ivy's hand. Her skin was ice cold. We're done here. Kyle, wait! My mom called out as we turned for the door. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The car ride home was a vacuum. Ivy was vibrating, whether from pure, unadulterated rage or a broken heart, I couldn't tell. We pulled into the driveway and just sat there in the dark. Then the buzzing started. My phone lit up. Mom. I let it go to voicemail, then Melissa. Ignored. 20 minutes later, my mother called again. I was about to silence it when a text flashed across the screen. Please don't tell the school. They'll expel them, I answered. My mother was sobbing on the other end. Kyle, please listen to me. They made a mistake. They're just girls. They didn't mean for it to go this far. You can't report this. If the school finds out, they'll be stripped of prom court. They could be expelled. Their futures, Kyle. I didn't say anything. I looked at Ivy. She was staring out the window at the empty street, her fingers tracing the hem of her hoodie over and over, trying to hold the fragments of her dignity together. My mother kept rambling, desperate, begging, pleading for the peace I'd spent 40 years maintaining at my own expense. In that moment, something snapped into place. It wasn't an explosion. It was a quiet, crystalline clarity. This wasn't about a dress anymore. It wasn't even about prom. It was about the fact that for Ivy's entire life, this family had treated her like an afterthought, a supporting character in the twins' starring roles. I ended the call with a single sentence. I won't tell you what it was yet, because what happened next is where the real story begins. The days that followed were hollow. Saturday morning arrived, prom day. I woke up early, fueled by that weird, jittery adrenaline hangover you get after a massive confrontation. You've already slammed the door, but your heart is still vibrating like it missed the memo that the fight is over. Ivy hadn't mentioned prom again. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just folded in on herself, moving through the house like she was wading through a thick gray fog. I watched her eat cereal, the spoon clinking rhythmically against the porcelain. It was a quiet that terrified me more than any tantrum ever could. Ivy, I said gently, do you want to go out? We can hit every boutique in the city. We'll find something even better. She shook her head without looking up. It's not worth it, Dad. It's just one night, honey, but it's your night. She looked up at me then, and the sheer weight of the sadness in her eyes nearly knocked the wind out of me. Not anymore. She spent most of the day in her room with the door slightly ajar. Not closed, just open enough to not be total isolation, but closed enough to signal she didn't want to be perceived. I sat in the living room, the guilt eating me alive. I should have never let them in. I should have protected her sanctuary. I looked at my phone. The Golden family was still blowing it up, oblivious to the fact that I was no longer playing by their rules. They thought they had won because the dress was in pieces. They had no idea that I was busy gathering the matchsticks. The guilt was a physical weight in my chest, a cold, oily stone that settled deep in my gut. I should have protected her better. I should have developed a spine decades ago and told my sister to kick rocks. I should have read the room, read the signs, and realized that family is just a word people use to excuse being toxic. Should have, could have, didn't. Around 6 p.m. on Saturday, the exact moment Ivy was supposed to be standing in the park, surrounded by cherry blossoms and the scent of expensive perfume, I knocked gently on her door. No answer. I pushed it open slowly. The room was dim, the only light coming from the glow of her phone. She was still in her oversized hoodie and gray sweatpants, curled in a ball on her bed. She was scrolling. I could see the reflection in her eyes. The limo, the corsages, the glitter. There was Jocelyn in a sparkly purple dress, her arms slung around another girl, both of them laughing so hard their eyes were closed. It was a portrait of pure, unadulterated teenage joy, the kind Ivy was supposed to have. Ivy didn't look away from the screen when she spoke. Her voice was flat, drained of color. They look happy. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning in the silence. I felt like an intruder in her grief. They miss you, Ivy. Jocelyn texted me twice asking if you were okay. She shrugged, a small, jerky movement. They'll be fine without me. Everyone is. There was a long, suffocating pause. Then she whispered something that absolutely gutted me. I just wanted to feel like I belonged, just for one night. It's one thing for your kid to be left out. That's a standard parental heartbreak. But it's a whole different level of hell when they start to believe they deserve it. When they start to think that they were never meant to fit in, like they're a glitch in the social matrix. I didn't try to fix it with a speech. There's no Hallmark card for having your soul crushed by your own cousins. There are no platitudes that can undo the sting of a betrayal that happens inside your own bloodline. So I just stayed. I sat in the dark with her. I told her a ridiculous, self-deprecating story about how I showed up to my middle school formal in a button-down shirt 3 sizes too big and got so nervous I spilled a literal gallon of fruit punch on the principal's shoes. She cracked a tiny, fragile smile. It wasn't a win, but it was progress. By Monday, the world kept turning, whether Ivy was ready for it or not. She went back to school. She did her homework. She moved through the house like a ghost, but her posture had changed. She walked with her shoulders hunched, always bracing for the next hit. The prom photos hit the school's digital bulletin board by Tuesday. A friend of mine, another band dad, texted me a screenshot. Jocelyn and the group were there, but Ivy's absence was a presence all its own. It was a hole in the frame. The school rumor mill, which is basically a Shark Tank with Wi-Fi, started churning. Someone started a whisper campaign that Ivy was too depressed to show up because she knew she wouldn't win prom court. It was a lie. She had been nominated, she belonged there. But high school eats quiet kids alive, and without the dress, without the confidence, she had simply let the waves pull her under. Melissa didn't reach out again. My mother, however, left 2 voicemails. The second one was a frantic, tearful mess. Apparently, the school administration had heard rumors of vandalism. Kyle, please. My mom sobbed into the recording. If someone reports this, the girls will lose everything. Lily applied for that leadership award, and Bella was just offered a spot in that prestigious mentorship program. Don't ruin their entire futures over some misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Like the dress had spontaneously decided to commit suicide via scissors. Like the slashes were just a creative difference. I didn't call her back. Something inside me had finally shifted from sad to calculated. I used to think rock bottom would feel like a cinematic explosion of rage, throwing chairs and screaming from the rooftops. It doesn't. Rock bottom feels like watching your daughter disappear behind her own eyes and realizing that no one is coming to save her except you. It looks like realizing that keeping the peace is just another way of saying letting the bullies win. So I started small. I wasn't going to go full pro-revenge yet, but I was done being a doormat. The following week, I met with the school counselor, Mrs. Rayburn. She was the kind of educator who actually sees the kids, not just the grades. She told me Ivy was one of the sharpest minds in the junior class, but that she had been shrinking lately. She has this quiet brilliance, Kyle, Mrs. Rayburn told me, her expression soft. But lately it feels like she's trying to become invisible. I didn't cry, but I felt my heart crack. I asked if there was anything, any project, any goal, that could give Ivy a reason to stand up again. Mrs. Rayburn mentioned the senior art showcase in May. Ivy wasn't a senior, but her talent for drawing was well known in the art department. They needed someone to help organize and contribute a guest piece. I brought it up over a dinner of lukewarm tacos. They want me to help? Ivy asked, her fork hovering in midair. They asked me to ask you, I clarified. It's your call, Ivy. No pressure. But the art teacher specifically mentioned your portfolio. She didn't say yes immediately. She didn't even smile. But 2 days later, I walked past her room and saw the door open. She was sitting at her desk, the charcoal pencil in her hand moving with a fierce, frantic energy. That was the first spark of light I'd seen in weeks. And as I watched her work, I looked at my phone and saw another text from Melissa, complaining about the stress her daughters were under because of the rumors. I realized then that the golden child era was officially over. If they wanted to talk about futures being ruined, we could talk. But first, I was going to make sure my daughter remembered who she was. The showcase was in 3 weeks. The reckoning? That was coming right after. The second spark of light came when I decided to stop avoiding the elephant in the room. I realized that by staying silent, I was accidentally validating the narrative that what happened was a shameful secret to be buried. We weren't going to make her relive it as a victim. We were going to reclaim it as a survivor. I asked her if she wanted to talk to a professional. Predictably, she flinched. I don't want to be dramatic, Dad, she said, looking at her shoes. That word, it felt like a physical blow. It was the toxic brand Melissa and my mother had seared into her. The idea that having a soul and a nervous system made you extra. It's not drama, Ivy, I said, keeping my voice as grounded as possible. It's damage, malicious intentional damage, and you don't have to carry the weight of someone else's cruelty alone. She eventually agreed, and I found a therapist who specialized in teens who felt invisible. After her second session, Ivy came out, adjusted her backpack, and said, "It's weird, but good weird." By mid-April, the good weird turned into a creative explosion. She wasn't just sketching in the dark anymore. She was designing for the art showcase. She titled her series What I Would Have Worn. It was a collection of abstract avant-garde fashion designs painted over the silhouettes of shattered, crumbling mannequins. The colors were moody, charcoals, deep indigos, and that signature slate blue, but the lines were sharp and unapologetic. Her counselor told me it was one of the most moving submissions the department had seen in years. While Ivy was rebuilding her spirit, I was busy collecting my own kind of data. I didn't want petty revenge. I didn't want to just cancel my nieces. I wanted cold, hard accountability. What happened to Ivy was a symptom of a systemic rot in my family. Entitlement, favoritism, and the kind of enabling that turns mean girls into sociopaths. The next time I stood in front of that system, I wasn't going to blink. By late April, the school's Student Integrity Board began looking into anonymous complaints. Someone had provided a dossier. Names, dates, a physical description of the property destruction, and a digital trail of the social media posts from that weekend. There were even screenshots of Bella's Snapchat messages to a group chat. If she thinks she's going to be prom queen in that bargain bin dress, she's delusional. Problem solved, LOL. I didn't send those. Ivy didn't send those. But I did have a conversation with Jocelyn. Jocelyn had been carrying a massive amount of survivor's guilt for going to prom while Ivy stayed home in the dark. She'd reached out to Ivy to apologize, and they reconnected. One night, during a late-night video call, Jocelyn told Ivy that Lily had actually been brave. Red, stupid. Enough to show off the ripped dress on FaceTime the night before prom. I told Jocelyn we weren't looking to start a war. But I added, if you feel like what happened wasn't okay, if you want to do something about it, there are formal channels. You choose your side. She chose. I didn't have to coach her. Teenagers can be breathtakingly cruel, but some of them are incredibly brave. The investigation was a low hum in the background of the school day, but whispers in high school have a way of becoming a roar. On the day the art showcase opened, Ivy stood by her display. She wasn't in satin or glitter. She wore a simple black blouse and jeans, but she stood tall. Her chin was up. She looked like someone who had survived a fire and realized she was fireproof. A teacher stopped in front of her shattered mannequin series, eyes wide. "This feels like a protest," he murmured. Ivy offered a small, knowing smile. "It kind of is." The showcase was a triumph. Her work was raw, haunting, and undeniably beautiful. Students stopped to take photos. One girl, a senior who didn't even know Ivy, whispered, "This is about the prom thing, isn't it?" Ivy just nodded. She didn't need to say their names. The art did the talking. As we drove home that night, the streetlights blurred past us. Ivy leaned her head against the window. "I think I'm okay now, Dad." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I waited for the but. "I still get mad sometimes," she added quietly. "But I'm not mad at myself anymore." I looked over at her, at this kid who had been systematically broken by the people who were supposed to love her, and who had rebuilt herself piece by piece without ever having to stoop to their level. "You shouldn't have had to go through any of it, Ivy. Not 1 second," she shrugged. "Maybe not, but I did. And now I know how strong I am. They can't take that back." It wasn't a perfect, happily ever after closure, but it was something steady, something real. However, the universe wasn't done with the balance sheet just yet. Justice, the kind that hits you where it hurts, was finally making its way to our doorstep. A few days later, Ivy was called into the guidance office. Normally, that room made her stomach flip with anxiety, but this time was different. And what she learned in that small, windowless office was about to make the Golden family's carefully curated world completely unravel. Ivy once told me that walking into the guidance office felt like entering a courtroom where your entire future was waiting to be stamped, approved, or denied. Even if you were a straight-A student with a clean record, those walls had a way of making you feel guilty, like they could see the secrets you hadn't even thought of yet. So when the summons came for her in the middle of third period, her heart didn't just thud, it hammered. My phone buzzed on my desk at work. Getting called to Mrs. Rayburn's office, no idea why. "Dad, I'm shaking." I typed back as fast as I could. "Breathe. It's probably something minor. Just listen and be honest. I'm right here if you need me." But my gut was screaming. I knew it wasn't minor. Ever since the anonymous dossier, the one with the surgical timelines, the high-res screenshots, and the devastating witness statements, had been slipped into the integrity board's hands, the school had been moving with the quiet, terrifying precision of a predator. Vandalism, targeted harassment, seeming, and malicious intent aren't just drama in the eyes of a school board. They are liability and grounds for serious disciplinary action. When Ivy stepped into that office, the air was cold. It wasn't just Mrs. Rayburn waiting for her. Sitting in the corner, looking stern and official, was the assistant principal, Mr. Hargrove. He was the kind of guy who didn't deal in misunderstandings. He dealt in consequences. "Take a seat, Ivy," Mrs. Rayburn said. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were sharp, scanning Ivy's face with a newfound intensity. Ivy sat, her hands tucked under her thighs to hide the trembling. "First of all," Mrs. Rayburn began, leaning in, "you are not in trouble. I want you to hear that clearly." The tension in Ivy's shoulders dropped an inch, but only an inch. "We've been reviewing an extensive report submitted to the Integrity Board," Mr. Hargrove said, his voice a low baritone. "It contains very specific allegations of property destruction and targeted harassment in connection with this year's prom. It names Bella and Lily specifically." Ivy stayed silent. Her stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. She felt like she was watching a movie of her own life. "According to this report, you were the victim," Mr. Hargrove continued. Still, she said nothing. She hadn't filed the report. She hadn't gone to the authorities. She had just been trying to survive the fallout. Mrs. Rayburn slid a thick manila folder across the mahogany desk. It spilled open, revealing color printouts that looked like a horror gallery. There was the slate blue dress, ripped and gutted on her bedroom floor. There were the Snapchat screenshots, the ones where Bella joked about solving the problem of Ivy's nomination. There were text threads from girls she barely knew, discussing the accident. Ivy's throat felt like it was closing. I didn't know you had these. We've confirmed the accuracy of every single item, Mr. Hargrove said. Multiple witnesses have come forward to corroborate the timeline, including a student who witnessed the garment bag being mishandled by your cousins just days before the event. Ivy blinked, her mind racing. Who? Who said that? We can't disclose names to protect the privacy of the witnesses, Mrs. Rayburn said, her voice softening into something truly empathetic. But I will say this, Ivy. You aren't invisible. People saw what happened, and some of them finally decided that staying silent was worse than speaking up. A strange sensation stirred in Ivy's chest. A volatile cocktail of confusion, disbelief, and a massive, overwhelming wave of relief. The gaslighting was over. The misunderstanding was dead. So, Ivy whispered, what happens now? That is partially up to you, Mr. Hargrove said, folding his hands. The school board has strict policies regarding the malicious destruction of property. While expulsion is a last resort, suspension is very much on the table, especially with this much documented proof. They would be stripped of their positions on the student council, and their spots on the prom court would be vacated retroactively. Ivy swallowed hard. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to ruin their lives. You didn't, Mrs. Rayburn countered. They did. You don't owe anyone your silence, Ivy. You can't fix what they chose to break. All you can do now is decide what you're willing to carry and what you're finally ready to put down. Ivy sat there for what felt like an eternity, the clock on the wall ticking like a countdown. Finally, she nodded. Just once. I don't want revenge, she said, her voice gaining a sudden crystalline strength. But I want to matter. I want it to be known that I mattered. The match was struck. The fire was lit. Later that evening, the story came pouring out of her at the dining room table. Her sketchpad was open between us, the pages filled with the jagged, beautiful designs of her What I Would Have Worn series. She traced the lines of a shattered mannequin, her charcoal pencil staining her fingers. They want to suspend them, Dad, she told me, her eyes wide. They're talking about pulling them from everything. Student council, the mentorship programs, all of it. I didn't interrupt. I just listened, finally letting the peacekeeper in me die a quiet death. They said I can make a statement, she continued. Not a public one, just a formal letter for the board. To explain what happened. To explain how it actually felt. I looked at her, seeing the woman she was becoming. Do you want to do it? She hesitated, then looked me dead in the eye. I think I do, but I want to do it my way. No more whispers, no more misunderstandings. That was the moment the plan took shape. It wasn't a pro-revenge trap or a scheme to humiliate them for the sake of a viral moment. That wasn't Ivy. She was too good for that. But she wanted the truth to land with the weight of an anvil. She wanted the people who had spent a lifetime minimizing her to finally see the scale of what they had done. She spent the next few nights hunched over her desk, her lamp burning late into the night. She wasn't just writing a statement. She was writing her way out of the shadow. She was building a mirror, and she was going to make sure that when Bella, Lily, and Melissa finally looked into it, they didn't like what they saw. Draft after draft, the trash can filled with crumpled pages as Ivy hollowed herself out. She wasn't just recounting the facts of a petty crime. She was opening a vein on the page. She wasn't looking for pity. She was hunting for power. One night, she stopped tapping her pen against the dining room table and looked at me with a startling intensity. I don't want to just tell the board what Bella and Lily did, she said, her voice dropping an octave. I want to tell them what it felt like. I want them to feel the air leave the room. She read me the opening paragraph, and the words hit me like physical blows. When I walked into my room and saw the dress ripped apart, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat on the floor and stared at it for 30 minutes before I even moved. Because somewhere deep down, in that dark part of my brain my family built for me, I thought maybe I deserved it. I thought I had gotten too happy, too hopeful, and the universe was just correcting the mistake. That's the part that hurts more than the silk or the seams. It's the fact that, for a moment, I believed they were right about me. I had to excuse myself. I told her I needed to check the laundry, but I actually just stood in the dark hallway, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes until the double vision faded and the tears retreated. My little girl was a goddamn phoenix. She submitted the statement the next morning, and in my mind, that was the endgame. But then the universe pivoted. Miss Galvez, Ivy's English lit mentor, and a woman who didn't suffer fools, reached out. The school was holding a senior showcase assembly, a high-profile event focusing on student voices. Ivy's written statement had moved the administrative staff to tears, and they wanted her to read a segment of it aloud. Initially, Ivy's old, invisible instinct kicked in. She said no, but 3 hours later, she walked into the kitchen and found me. "I want to do it," she said, her jaw set. "Are you sure, Ivy? That's a lot of eyes, a lot of heat." She nodded, a fierce light behind her eyes I hadn't seen since she was a toddler. "It won't be just for them. It'll be for me. I'm taking my voice back." Suddenly, there was a spotlight waiting for her, a real one, on a stage in front of her peers, her teachers, and most importantly, the 3 people who had spent a decade trying to dim her. While Ivy rehearsed, I began laying the foundations for my own brand of accountability. I was done with the quiet dignity route. I'd spent 40 years as the lesser sibling, the disappointment, the guy who took the high road until it led him off a cliff. And what did I have to show for it? A mother who begged for the silence of victims to protect the reputation of bullies. A sister who viewed cruelty as a birthright. I wasn't going to be the peacekeeper anymore. I was going to be the witness. I compiled everything. The paper trail of Melissa's gaslighting, the cold dismissals, the texts where she called Ivy dramatic for having her property destroyed. I made sure to speak to the school's parent board anonymously. Melissa was a prominent member, and I knew the board would find it enlightening to learn about the toxic enabling she condoned behind closed doors. I didn't smear her. I didn't lie. I just presented the truth. Measured, undeniable, and sharp as a razor. I also reached out to the local community arts center where Ivy used to take weekend classes. I told them about her What I Would Have Worn series. The director was floored. They didn't just offer her a spot in the summer youth showcase. They gave her a featured wall. "I don't have to compete for it?" she asked when I told her. "No, kiddo," I said, pride swelling in my chest. "You already earned it by surviving the competition you didn't ask for." But the real kicker came when the school asked me to sit on a panel for the annual Parents Forum regarding student mental health and bullying. My name had been put forward by several teachers who had seen how I stood by Ivy. This was my moment to show up, not just as a dad, but as a warning to every parent who thinks kids will be kids is an excuse for psychological warfare. The week of the assembly arrived with an eerie, pressurized calm. Ivy was a bundle of nerves, but they were the warrior before the charge kind of nerves. She practiced in front of the mirror, then in front of me, her voice gaining a metallic edge of certainty with every repetition. The night of the showcase, the auditorium was a sea of faces. Students, faculty, and there, in the 3rd row center, sat Bella and Lily, flanked by Melissa, who was looking around with her usual air of bored superiority. They had no idea the script had been rewritten. Backstage, Ivy was holding her speech, the paper slightly crinkled from her grip. "I'm not scared, Dad," she whispered. "I know," I said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "But it's okay if you are." She turned, her eyes locking onto mine with a clarity that made me feel like the student. "Not anymore." Then the moderator's voice boomed over the speakers. "Please welcome Ivy." She stepped out from the wings, moving into the blinding white light of the center stage spot. The auditorium fell into a vacuum of silence. She looked out at the sea of people, at the cousins who mocked her, the aunt who dismissed her, and the peers who had ignored her. She cleared her throat, adjusted the mic, and began to speak. What she said next, the raw power of her presence, didn't just break the silence, it shattered the entire foundation of our family's lies. The underdogs weren't just winning, they were taking over. The auditorium was a vacuum. Not a single cough, not a rustle of a program. Just that heavy, pressurized silence that leans forward. Breath held, eyes fixed. It was the kind of silence that knows it's about to witness a car crash or a miracle. Ivy stood center stage, bathed in a harsh, uncompromising spotlight. She wasn't wearing the slate blue satin or the silver heels. She was in a black turtleneck and jeans, her hair pulled back tight, no makeup, no glitter, no costume. She looked like a shadow standing in the light, calm and steady as a heartbeat. Then, she spoke. When people say high school is about finding yourself, she began, her voice projecting with a clarity that made my chest tighten. They don't tell you how many people will try to take that away from you first. She paused. The audience was a sea of stone. I was nominated for prom court this year. It surprised me. Not because I didn't think I was worthy, but because for the first time it felt like someone else saw me too. She looked up, her gaze seemingly locking onto the third row where the Golden family sat. And then, 3 days before prom, my dress was destroyed. It wasn't ruined in a spill. It wasn't ripped by accident. It was slashed piece by people I trusted. People who told me, and I quote, that I shouldn't be the prettiest anyway. A collective, jagged gasp rippled through the crowd like a physical wave. I watched Melissa stiffen as if she'd been struck. Bella's tan face went a sickly, chalky white. Lily stared down at her lap, her fingers twisting frantically. They didn't just cut fabric, Ivy said, her voice gaining a terrifying, resonant weight. They tried to cut into who I thought I was. They tried to shred my right to be hopeful. She took one small step forward. It was a tiny movement, but it felt seismic, like the earth shifting on its axis. But I realized something. The people who try to dim your light are always the ones most afraid of how bright you can get. They can cut the satin. They can rip the seams, but they can't cut me. The silence returned, deeper this time, before the first hands started to clap. It wasn't a polite, graduation-style patter. It was slow, rhythmic, started by Jocelyn, then a teacher, then a wave that turned into a roar. It wasn't a standing ovation, it was something better. It was the sound of a room finally seeing the person they'd ignored. Ivy bowed her head once, a brief, dignified acknowledgement, and stepped into the wings. I met her in the shadows. She looked dazed, her eyes wide, but her chin was still high. I said what I needed to, she whispered, her voice trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. You said it perfectly, Ivy. Every word. We didn't stick around for the cookies and lukewarm lemonade. We didn't need the forced smiles of parents who were now whispering about the twins scandal. We ducked out the side door and drove home through the cool spring night, the windows cracked to let the scent of rain and asphalt fill the car. The fallout, however, was swift and brutal. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Mr. Hargrove, the assistant principal. The Integrity Board had concluded its review with the speed of a guillotine. The combination of the digital evidence, the witness statements, and Ivy's public testimony had been a kill shot. Bella and Lily were officially suspended for 1 week. They were stripped of every extracurricular title they held, gone from the student council, banned from the leadership retreat they'd been bragging about, and, most significantly, disqualified from prom court retroactively. Their names were scrubbed. The school wasn't going to play the high school drama game anymore. Melissa, predictably, lost her absolute mind. She called me that afternoon, her voice a shrill, vibrating mess of rage. Are you proud of yourself, Kyle? Are you happy now? You've destroyed their entire senior year. Their college applications, their reputations, everything. I didn't destroy anything, Melissa, I said, my voice so level it surprised me. They did that themselves. I just stopped helping them hide the evidence. They're just girls, she screamed. They made a mistake. A stupid teenage mistake. They weren't just girls when they stood in a 16-year-old's bedroom and systematically mutilated her joy while laughing about it. That's not a mistake, Mel. That's a character study. She scoffed, a jagged, ugly sound. So this was it, huh? Your big moment. You've been waiting for a way to get back at me since we were kids. You used your own daughter to settle a score. That one actually made me laugh. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was the sound of someone realizing they'd been fighting a ghost for 20 years. This isn't about you, Melissa. It never was. That's what you can't wrap your head around. Oh, please, she snapped. You've always been jealous. Mom loved me more, I was the success, and you've been trying to punish me for that since the 11th grade. There it was. The deep, rotten root of the golden child complex. The absolute conviction that the world revolved around her spotlight. I was never jealous, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, clinical tone. I just got tired of pretending your version of love was normal. You taught your daughters that winning matters more than kindness. You taught them that being pretty is a license to be cruel. And now, when that's come back to bite them, you're looking for someone else to blame because you can't face the fact that you raised bullies. The silence on the other end of the line was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. For the first time in my life, the little ray of sunshine had nothing to say. I didn't wait for her to find her voice. I hung up. I walked into the living room and found Ivy. She was sitting by the window, sketching in her pad. Not a shattered mannequin this time, but something new, something whole. She looked up at me and smiled, and for the first time in years, the shadow was gone. We were finally living in the light, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. But you raised them, Melissa. You didn't just watch. You handed them the scissors and told them the world was theirs to cut up. The line went dead. The dial tone was the most honest thing I'd heard from my sister in decades. I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that the bridges weren't just burned. They were vaporized. And for the first time in 41 years, I didn't feel the urge to grab a fire extinguisher. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. It was a handwritten letter from my mother. 3 pages of cramped, shaky cursive on that floral stationery she only uses for serious family business. I sat at the kitchen table, the afternoon sun highlighting the dust motes in the air, and I read. The first page was a masterclass in deflection. It was littered with, I didn't know, and they're just impulsive children, and it was never meant to be malicious. The second page pivoted to the classic family guilt trip. You're tearing this family apart, Kyle. Think of the holidays. Ivy could have handled this privately. Why did it have to be so public? I almost threw it away right then. But the third page? That one cracked the world open. The tone shifted, the defensive wall crumbled, and for the first time, I saw my mother without the golden child filter. She admitted she had looked the other way for years. She confessed that she had downplayed Melissa's behavior and the twins, because maintaining the illusion of a perfect family was easier than confronting the rot beneath the surface. She wrote, I didn't want to believe they were capable of such cruelty, so I chose not to look too closely. I failed you when you were young, Kyle. I let you be the shadow so Melissa could be the sun. And I failed Ivy now. I am so sorry. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I am sorry. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not yet. But I let Ivy read it. She sat there for a long time, tracing the ink with her thumb. It's a start, she said quietly. A small, late start, but it's something. The school year didn't end with a bang. It ended with a sense of profound, rhythmic peace. Ivy crushed her finals, pulling straight A's like it was nothing. She officially accepted the guest feature at the local community arts center. We spent our evenings planning a summer road trip, just the two of us. Some national parks, a lot of bad radio music, and zero drama. Somewhere she could just breathe. On the last day of school, Jocelyn and a group of girls from the orchestra actually showed up at our house to pick Ivy up for lunch. They were loud, messy, and genuinely happy to see her. I watched them from the porch as they took selfies in the driveway. Ivy wasn't the blurry friend in the background anymore. She wasn't the girl hiding behind her hair. In every photo, she was front and center, her chin lifted, her eyes bright and piercing. As for Bella and Lily, they slunk back to school after their suspension like ghosts haunting their own lives. They kept their heads down and their mouths shut. There was no grand apology, no cinematic moment of redemption, just a cold, hard silence. But the social climate had shifted. They were no longer the it girls. They were no longer untouchable. People looked at them and saw the scissors. Truth, once it's out in the open, has a way of staining the skin. The real turning point, though, happened at the summer art showcase. Ivy's collection, What I Would Have Worn, was the talk of the gallery. People stood in front of those shattered mannequins for 20 minutes at a time, whispering about the raw, visceral emotion of the pieces. Toward the end of the night, a woman in a sharp blazer approached Ivy. She was from a high-profile local nonprofit that specialized in youth advocacy and design internships. She looked at Ivy's sketches, then looked at Ivy. "Your work moved me," the woman said, her voice full of genuine respect. "You clearly have something important to say, and it's obvious you aren't afraid to say it. The world needs voices like yours right now." Ivy looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. I'll definitely think about it," she stammered, and I knew she would, because the girl who had sat on her bedroom floor, trembling as she clutched a pile of ruined blue satin, was gone. In her place stood someone taller, not in height, but in presence. She had been broken, yes, but she had rebuilt herself piece by piece, and the new version was stronger, sharper, and a hell of a lot smarter. I wasn't just the dad trying to atone for a mediocre childhood anymore. I was the man who had finally stood up and said enough. We left the gallery that night under a sprawling sky full of stars. There were no fireworks, no grand speeches, just the quiet hum of a car engine and the feeling of a weight finally lifted. As we turned onto our street, Ivy rested her head against the cool glass of the window and whispered something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. "They tried to take my night away, Dad, but I got my voice instead. And honestly, that was so much better." Thank you for staying with me until the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for my channel. Your support means everything. See you in the next one.